Conversation, conversation, conversation. This is, I think, the word I can pick up. But I will ask the moderators of the three sessions to summarize three messages, three sentences of what is the message that you want to convey from the discussions in the three sessions. So, Lara, you were the first.
Thank you. I think the first message for me from my session would be the ongoing desire for the EU to remain a directional leader and a bridge builder, the limitations of a unilateral policy making, the need to reach out to our partners in an honest way so that we're not perceived as extractive, but rather as a facilitator and as a partner that knows how to listen and learns from others' experiences, and we are generous enough to share in a way that is relevant and valuable to our partners. Probably I would also highlight the opportunity of strengthening cooperation with partners that are not normally on our radar, especially Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you. Mikel, your panel was down to the ground. So what we can come as messages from the ground?
I think it's difficult to condensate in three messages, but I will try. The first one to me is the just transition is possible. That was raised by all the panelists, and I think it's important. But for that, we need institutions and projects in the territory. Then I will also like to stress ideas that appear in most of the speakers: anticipation, social innovation, and worker participation. That is critical, and also mainstreaming just transition into other sectors and scaling up the investments in other sectors. And then my third point, I think it will be a message of hope, because we have today in the panel the companies, the government, unions saying together they can make the just transition feasible and possible. So given the context of polarization that we are seeing today, for me to have the opportunity to listen to these actors saying today that message is also an important key message to take home today.
Yeah. Frank, science was the first to raise the voice. We are now in a point where society wants to move. So what will be the messages that we can extract from the last panel on what will be the role of science in the future?
Thanks, Maria. First, congratulations to you and everybody who organised this. This is a really fascinating day. In terms of, I think the messages from the discussion on science is the issue of dialogue. We need to have a dialogue process. It's not just a report, it's not just a briefing, it's a dialogue. We need a dynamic dialogue. And that's an ongoing process between all of the actors, science and policy and citizens. I think the other thing that I got from our panel was the opportunities. We have a great richness of scientific expertise in Europe, and obviously major resources in terms of the investments we've made in systematic observations and understanding of how to translate those systematic observations into information. But we need to further develop and use those resources that we have. And then finally, how do we do that? I think the key answer to that was co-creation. And that sort of goes us back to the dialogue. You need to sit down with the stakeholders, the scientists, the policymakers, the citizens. And I think that came true in everything that was said here today about, you need those sort of citizens' assemblies. You need to talk to the people who are affected. If you don't talk to the people whose lives are going to change, they will resist for very obvious reasons if they find they've been told what to do and they're not part of that decision-making process. So I think, yeah, it's dialogue, it's opportunity, it's co-creation.
It is quite interesting to see that the three panels are coalescing to very similar messages. And again, the summary is we need more space for conversation. We need more space for understanding each other. And this is not only referred to the whole society. It's also within the scientific community. We really need to make more efforts on integrating our own knowledge in order to be more contributing to the societal dialogue that needs to be. And I think there's three words that I think I summarize for my own benefit today. More dialogue, trust, and the last one I forgot, but and respect. Because trust is important, but respect is also very important. And respecting each other is not something that scientists we are very keen on need. So we are more like confronting our ideas. And what aim we have is building collectively new visions for the future. And collectively means all. And I would like to emphasize also that in these conversations, we always try to focus between science and policy, but citizens are fundamental, and I pop it up here as well. And there have been some exercises in Europe which have been very interesting, and I will, appeal to you to look at them. The assemblies, the citizens' assemblies are being also very interesting vehicle to mobilizing and to put the value of the citizen knowledge at the same level than the value of the policy knowledge and the science knowledge. I think that's fundamental for moving forward. So thank you, everyone. I would like to give the floor now to, the one that is going to inherit the dialogue. Luc Bas is the Director of Climate and Environment Risk Assessment Center, which we knew about it recently, and we also know that you're doing a great job. So please, just give us the sense for the next dialogue.
Thanks a lot. Muchas gracias. Quite a challenge after such a day. I'm here because I'm a friend of the Think 2030 process, first of all and foremost. And I was part of it in a different constituency. Now I'm the director of, again, a new center, but it's a completely different character of what Etienne just talked about. It's the Climate and Environment Risk Assessment Center in Belgium. It's a decision by the government to have that center and to advise, and that's where our challenge is, and therefore I picked up a lot of good information to help us do the job. But we're actually advising the National Security Council. So we have to translate the risk, and there are so many factors to risk, and it's a very complex issue, as already mentioned. We have to try to translate that and get the ear of those that decide on the high policy to increase the security for Belgium. That means more resilience for Belgium. And that means we need to translate. And this brings me, I will just react before can I have this? Well, I'll have the slide just in a minute. I'm going to react a bit also to what was said today. And I'll start with the scientists, which is, of course, the biggest challenge in this room. Although many have left, unfortunately, the scientists may not be all there, but you're dominantly a science audience. I'm an engineer by education, and I can tell you I'm not a techno-optimist, I'm sorry to say. And I can explain later on at the drink or at the dinner tonight, but for scientists, I think it's a difficult space to be in, because you are researching, and your main purpose of being is to research. And there is a lot to be researched still. Nobody doubts it. And at the same time, you're challenged because of, or it's been misused often for no action. We need more research because we don't know. But we do know more than enough. So that's the first. The second challenge that you have as a scientist is to translate it. And I think it's complex matter, but it needs to be translated so the ones that are not as educated or as don't have their PhDs, and honestly, sometimes those are the politicians, they need to understand. And of course, the whole society needs to understand. And one thing I would like you to advise to read, if you haven't spotted it yet, is a book by Randy Olson, and it has a very provocative title. It's called Don't Be Such a Scientist. The guy, American marine scientist, he has a PhD, by the way, so he's a real scientist. He went to Hollywood and he started to think of how to communicate about it. And it's almost like a manual for scientists. So if you forget the name because it's not projected here, come and see me and I'll tell you where it is. Don't Be Such a Scientist by Randy Olson. Brilliant. So that's a quick reaction, if I may, on the science part. Other things that you could say there is science-based targets. That's another kind of almost, do they exist? There is a target of the 1.5, that's science-based, but the actual targets in policy are almost never science-based. It's a political agreement, and what is ecologically relevant is politically often just not feasible. Because if you look now, when going back to the first session that was talking about the governance, the global governance, I think Ingmar tried to, but I think he's now off because he was not so well and he's not here anymore. But he was the only one that started to think of how to challenge the current UNFCCC process. But then we don't dare because it's the only thing we have at the moment. So we don't dare to challenge it, but it should be challenged because it's 28 COPs and every COP is the most important COP. Everybody says it's the most important COP. We go there and we do a global stock take, which is amazing. It's amazing to do a global stock take, but shouldn't we have a real implementation summit there? Stock taking, yeah, great, but let's try to implement. That is not a formal Belgian position, by the way, because I cannot do that. I'm now in the government again. The center is an independent center in the government. So we try to maneuver between all the sectors and not only from the environment perspective. But yeah, so the reform of the UNFCCC and the COPs, there's one great position paper from the Club of Rome on this. And it's not long, by the way, it's a 2-pager. So have a look at it. It's the Club of Rome restructuring the COP process, and it was sent to Gutierrez a while ago. And then the last point, and that is, I think, the most difficult, is the just transition. We still often focus a lot on the fact that it's the workforce, and of course, that is super important because then otherwise you lose the momentum, you lose the interest if you would not deal with how to transform the workforce and how to reskill people and how to give opportunity from what you could call a clean revolution. But of course, it's so much more. And now I come to a few points before I try to explain why this is on the screen. If you really look at the big challenge, you have to drastically reduce consumption. That's not going to happen through behavioral change. It's going to happen if ever politicians start to dare to regulate that. But if you reduce consumption and you do it in a linear way, then it will not happen. So what it is then is in a reduced consumption space. In that space, you will have to redistribute material wealth. And so a COP within a country, in Europe, and in the world should basically be about reducing material wealth or redistributing material wealth in a reduced context. If we don't say that, then we're not fair, we're not honest. And again, how much science do we need? Yes, we need to know what that means. And the final point is how to get from science-based targets to the politicians. It's extremely uncomfortable. And a politician will not be re-elected if he would say what is really needed, or if he would do what is really needed, because the people are not with him. And it's because it's not done, or it's often not done in the correct way. And then a very small example. How on earth, and I'm not saying which government, but there's many of them doing it, we're spending public money on fossil fuel subsidies into the billions. And that's, of course, one thing that doesn't seem to be stopping, which is unbelievable. But even the smaller subsidies that are well-intended, for example, 5,000 euros to buy an electric vehicle, they will benefit the ones that actually can buy an electric vehicle, right? That's public money used for a green measure. And what is the effect? I mean, I'm a bit provocative here, but I think we should reflect on it, especially in the just transition context. And then just to try to come to the point I wanted to make here is that if we look at countries in Europe, or Europe as a whole, and we discussed it, and I think you brought it up, Miles brought it up, we, as Europe, cannot impact climate change on our own, but we can deal with the impact. We have the power to deal with the impact, we have the resources to deal with the impact, but we're not doing it sufficiently. We're not preparing for what's coming. It has to be risk assessment based, hence this new center is also put together in Belgium. And then, of course, from that risk assessment, we have to take action. And often, many places, the actions are not necessarily based on the risk assessment. So, for example, one of the big things that is still failing to do at the national level, we have it at the global level. I remember the Stern report of the cost of inaction. The cost of inaction is not well enough calculated, not even in Europe, I think, but definitely not at the national level. And I think that's one of the biggest risks, but also one of the motivators to get action going. That's something that I maybe missed a little bit here. So now if you look at this graph, that's the main point, and to conclude, we have to go really beyond this. It's not beyond GDP only. We could have a long discussion about beyond GDP. It's also beyond greenhouse gases. I mean, it's really much more than that. And the center, this new center, is on purpose not called a climate risk assessment center. It's climate and environment. And this is because these are all the other risks that we're confronted with. And you all know this, of course, this model. And I think this is kind of almost summing up what the challenge is, and can also be seen from a solutions perspective. And it's the combination. And everybody in the room that has been looking at the donut economy sees, of course, that that's coming from there. It is a great way to present it, the donut economy of Kate Raworth. I think there's a lot of scientific debate about it. It's not potentially as solid scientifically as we would want, but it does illustrate it well, and it can become more science-based if we want, and we should, I think. If you look at this as one example, we will have the challenge in Belgium now with this center to translate this to the Belgium level. Immediate question, planetary boundaries, Belgium, how does that work? What is missing from this graph is that you actually have to split it up in the production effect that you have in your country, and then, of course, the consumption effect that you have in your country, but in Europe, mostly outside of Europe. If we look at these things and we try to do everything at the same time, it's not going to work. It's going to be too complex. So what we're planning to do now in the center in Belgium is to get climate change as the climate risk assessment. There's a lot of documentation, analysis, and we will add the biodiversity loss as a first attempt to assess the risk of biodiversity loss. So that's what we're planning at, and we want to look at the transitional risks because that social foundation is key. So finally, translating these risks into security issue might help to get the attention of those policymakers that maybe not always with us and start to think in terms of we have to put on the pause button now. It's been enough. The people don't want it anymore. I think if we get it well explained with good solutions that are fair, I think it can be done, and we should not despair even for the next European elections. I think it's all hands on deck to explain why this needs to happen and how it can happen and how it can happen in a fair way. Finally, and that's a bit of a government responsibility now, I think Matthijs has mentioned just transition as a key element for the Belgian presidency. One thing that didn't come up that much, only in between the lines, was circular economy. I think the potential of circular economy to contribute to all these targets, all of these, is immense. So it's another priority for the Belgian presidency. And the other one is, and we're back to what I said earlier, the adaptation. I think there's so much more sense in investing in adaptation measures. And there are many that are no regret, and we're still not doing them. For example, the whole nature-based solutions context, I know I'm wearing my former IUCN hat, we are not investing in it enough, and they're all super variation of benefits that go with it. So getting things moving on adaptation, there will be a council conclusions package for June from the Belgian presidency, and of course the big one will be the 2040 target, but that's not in my league, that's for others to comment on, but that will be a big result. So there will be a lot of adaptation events in the next half year. I hope to see you there. Some of them we will be involved, and I wish you all good luck with all the actions from the scientists, from the policymakers, and everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Luc. I think you gave us food for thought for 10 more dialogues, probably. So thank you for that and for the insights for the coming 6 months. I would like to, again, I think, congratulate everyone in the room because you were all very proactive on asking questions. The debates were very open, and I think we all learned a lot today. I hope that one of the results of this is that we all will become more flexible, more able to work together, and the solutions will be built by the whole society, including policymakers, scientists, citizens, and we need to remember that we are all citizens as well. So I think that's also a very important point. I would like to thank again the Ministry for giving us this very spectacular place to have this conversation today. The European Climate Foundation again, that was, providing funding for to be able to organize the event. The different institutions that have been contributing with putting the panels together, Elcano, BC3, the GPI Climate, also with the support of some of the projects we have together, which is also a very good space for working. And I wish you a very nice evening. Enjoy Madrid. I think we have probably government very soon complete in Spain, so that's also good news because that will help us to accelerate also actions in the country. So thank you very much.